How many Scrum events are there? Are there 4, 5 or 6 events? This question is not that easy to answer. Join me in this video and I will explain you why. First of all, I would like to recall what a Scrum event is after all. Basically, it's a meeting. In some of these meetings, the whole Scrum team will participate, which is composed of the Scrum Master, the Product Owner, and the development team. In other events, only certain roles will participate. The special thing about Scrum events is that they are standardized. The advantage for you is that you do not always have to think about the format of the meeting. It is already defined through the Scrum Guide. For each event, the Scrum Guide defines, first of all, the maximum duration, or rather the time box. Secondly, the roles that are participating. And third, the content of the meeting. This approach boosts efficiency and creates transparency at critical points. And there is one more thing you should know about Scrum events. They all have to be done. You can't just omit one of them. But let's get back to the question. How many Scrum events do exist? Well, there is no exact answer to this question. It can be 4, 5 or 6 depending on how you define an event. Let's have a look on the 3 options. Having a look on the Scrum Guide is always a good idea. So let's review the chapter Scrum Events. As you can see, there are 5 subchapters. There is the sprint, sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. In other words, according to the table of contents of the Scrum Guide, there are exactly these 5 Scrum events. In the Scrum Guide, you can find the following phrase. All events are time-boxed events such that every event has a maximum duration. So a Scrum event is defined as a meeting that is limited by a time box. But what's a time box? The time box is the maximum duration a Scrum event can have. The event may not exceed the time box, but it can be shorter. However, this definition does not apply to sprints. Why? Because sprints do not have a maximum duration, but a defined duration, and that is not the same. If an event is time-boxed, it can also finish earlier. If it has a defined duration, duration is fixed and may not vary. The Scrum Guide tells us exactly that. Once a sprint begins, its duration is fixed and cannot be shortened or lengthened. According to this definition, sprints are not Scrum events as they do not have a time box. They are rather the container within which all Scrum events take place. So according to this definition, there would be only 4 Scrum events: sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. When I'm teaching a Scrum course, I always add another event to the already existing ones that you can also find on my Scrum poster: the product backlog refinement. The product backlog refinement is an activity that in my experience receives little or no attention. It's almost like the forgotten thing in Scrum. However, it is absolutely crucial for getting done the sprint planning within the time box. It is another Scrum myth that agile estimating and breaking epics down into user stories is being done in the sprint planning. These activities actually take place in the backlog refinement. Okay, now you can say that backlog refinement is not a Scrum event as it is not subjected to a time box. However, from my point of view, it has something like a time box. If you look up the product backlog refinement in the Scrum Guide, you will find the following phrase. Refinement usually consumes no more than 10% of the capacity of the development team. So it is kind of a Scrum event, which however is distributed over the whole sprint, but in total it may not consume more than 10% of the capacity of the development team. In that sense, it actually is a time box because the maximum duration is defined and it can also take less time, which are the two defining criteria of a time box. If you find these arguments reasonable, we would have 6 Scrum events: sprint planning, daily Scrum, the sprint review, sprint retrospective, the sprint itself, and also product backlog refinement. Summary: you can decide on your own what is a Scrum event for you, and if there are 4, 5, or 6 Scrum events in your opinion. In the end, this definition is not important for having success with Scrum. However, what in my opinion is really important is to emphasize the importance of the product backlog refinement. You can treat it as a Scrum event or not, but it is important not to neglect it. And I think calling it a Scrum event will give it some additional attention. If this video was helpful for you, I would appreciate a thumb up and your subscription. Thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate your time.